So, thank you so much for joining us on the inaugural International Imposter Phenomenon Awareness Day. Kate, you might like to introduce yourself.
So, yes, many of you already know me, but I know some of you joining don't. So, my name is, as you can see, Dr. Kate Atkin. It's like, woohoo, because I never expected to get a doctorate. I'm the one that failed the 11 plus out of the three of us and went to the local secondary modern school. I'm not the academic person, and I now really have to change that mindset in my 60th year being on this planet because I've discovered that I can do this academic stuff. And it's lovely to have that, not just the knowledge, but actually what's led me to do it was that discovery of the imposter phenomenon. So that's the point where we think we can't do something, but we actually realize we can. So that's a little bit about me. And yes, I have written a book on the imposter phenomenon too.
Glad you got that one in. You got your book in. Excellent. My name's Dr. Terri Simpkin. For those of you who don't know me, there are a few people on the call that know me and my work. I've been working on investigating and researching and compiling workshops and learning and development programs since 2012. Like Kate, I had an experience with a overwhelming sense of the imposter experience to the point where I was considering some pretty drastic self-harm in order to not hand my PhD in because I believed that I would be laughed at and that someone had made a monumental mistake. So both of us have come from a point of personal experience with this. And I suppose we'll get to the rationale in a moment. Now, for those of you who are not in Australia, I'd just like to explain that because Australia, as you will know, is a colonised country, I being British am very privileged to be able to live in a country that is being shared by the traditional owners of the land. So my acknowledgement of country is coming to you from Lutruwita, which is the traditional name for Tasmania. I acknowledge the enduring sovereignty of the original people, the Palawa, and the Muanina people of Hobart down here in Tasmania. And I appreciate their compassion in allowing us to share their beautiful country with them. But to get us started, I'd like to explain the rationale for the International Imposter Phenomenon Awareness Day. Both Kate and I have been me probably more than Kate, overwhelmingly frustrated by the mythology, the misinformation, and the disinformation around the imposter phenomenon. Really, what we're trying to do here is to diminish the myths, which we'll talk about in a moment, the misunderstandings around the experience as it is. We know from social media, from the populist media, and indeed I was on the radio yesterday here in Australia, and continually the presenter kept talking about the imposter syndrome, even though I had been there or was on there to talk about why we shouldn't be calling it a syndrome. And so the rationale really is to make sure that we shift the language, we shift the mindset of individuals so that they're, not identifying themselves as experiencing the imposter phenomenon if they're not, but also, more importantly, for people who perhaps can't talk about this in a language that they can grasp hold of and then diminish their experiences. So let's get to some of the myths. Well, the big one, the first one, the one that really drives me nuts is this idea that it is a syndrome. You will have heard it called a syndrome. It's often, identified as the imposter syndrome. And even in academic work, it's often referred to as a syndrome. Now, people often say to me, Terri, why do you get so exercised about this? Why do you get so annoyed and het up about the whole point? Isn't it just a name? It's not just a name, because the associated connotations that come with this idea of it being a syndrome is that it's a medicalized condition. Often people associate it with a mental health condition, which it isn't. That even in the literature, we see it called a syndrome, and therefore it's setting up this idea that it can be diagnosed as a medical thing that somebody might be suffering from, and certainly that's not the case either. In talking to people in my workshops and the research that I've been doing over the last decade or so, people have told me that because they thought it was a syndrome, a medicalized condition, it actually stopped them from talking about their experiences. And so if something is stopping people giving or giving them fear of talking about their experiences, then they will not seek assistance. If they don't seek assistance, then they will continue to have what for some people can be quite a debilitating suite of experiences. Now, some of the other myths you may have heard that it's a women's thing, that only women or only women or ladies or females will get this experience. That's absolutely not true either. In fact, the original work was done by Pauline Rose Clance and Suzanne Imes, who called it a phenomenon way back in the 1970s. Their original work was on women in academia, and that's probably where this idea has come from. But certainly since then, since the 70s, research tells us that men experience it, and now there's starting to be work coming out in other genders and particularly transgender experiences. Often people will say, oh, isn't it just a bit of self-doubt? Why can't you just get over yourself? Well, it's not. It's not self-doubt. Self-doubt is certainly part of the experience, but it is not the whole story. And again, one of the things that really leans into that misinformation is that self-doubt is something that you can easily get over, that you can perhaps get a little bit of confidence, you can do a bit of yoga, hug a tree, feel better about yourself, and it will all go away. And that's certainly not the case with the imposter phenomenon. So it is not self-doubt. This idea that you have it or you don't, that's absolutely not true. It exists on a continuum. Some people will experience it only occasionally. Other people, like some of the respondents to my research, experience it every single day. And so we can't be flippant about how important it is to some people and how debilitating it can be for people in their everyday lives. Often it's identified, and it comes along with this moniker of the syndrome, that's a mental health condition. It certainly isn't. We know from research that it is often associated with anxiety, depression, self-handicapping, but it is not in and of itself a mental health condition. It was even suggested by Michelle Obama once that it is just something that you need to live with. It's just something that stays with you for life. And that's absolutely not true either. Once you know how this thing actually works, how it's playing out for you, and perhaps what what's feeding that experience, then you can actually do something about it. You are able to diminish it. And Kate will talk about that in a minute too. Something that is very close to my heart and to the research that I've been doing is that it's a personal thing. That's absolutely not true either. It's actually it's a very highly complex and social experience that is often fed by external factors. So it's the storytelling that we've been learning as we grow up and coming out and living in the world. It's the master narratives that we see and the stuff that is embedded in stereotyping, implicit and explicit bias, the stuff that actually sits out in the world that tells us who we are and how we fit into our community. So there's a social piece to this as well. And of course, part of that social piece, and it's certainly where my interest lies, is how workplace systems, processes, and procedures actually feed this experience in some people. And so that coming back to that personal thing, it's actually two sides of the one coin. On the one side, we have the personal experience, the personal learning about ourselves and our place in the world, and what we're experiencing in terms of the master narratives, what's going on out in the world, our communities and our workplaces. And indeed, it's context bound. People can experience it in one context, perhaps at university or school, but not experience it when they get into the workplace, or vice versa. They could experience it in one workplace, but not in another. So this idea that it is a constant syndrome is actually a misrepresentation of the experience. We do know that it can impede success. So when we look at some of the bigger issues that people in workplaces face, such as perhaps feeling that they're unable to advance their careers because they're unwilling or unable, or feel that they are unqualified to apply for promotions or different jobs, it really can put a lid on their potential. And that can be really quite damaging to people because they're unable to live into that potential that they might have. And so this idea that it can't be diminished, well, yes, it can be. And as I said, once we actually understand the notion of what the imposter phenomenon is, then we can unpack it and identify initiatives and behaviors and thought patterns that actually work against the imposter phenomenon experience. For me, words have power. And again, coming back to that point about why I get so exercised about this, getting the language right around experiences such as this is incredibly important. Giving people the language to talk about their experiences means that they can move into spaces, perhaps with their friends or their mentors, or perhaps a coach or people in their workplace, perhaps their supervisors, and provide an informed way of talking about their experiences rather than thinking that they might have a mental health condition, with all of, still in 2026, the stigma that comes along with that in places. And so part and parcel of our work here is to shift the language, to give people a very clear understanding about what the imposter phenomenon is and what it isn't, so that we can start shifting the narrative away from that misinformation and that a misunderstanding around what the experience actually is. Words have power. I'll hand over now to Kate to identify some of the things that you can do in regard to minimising the experience in your own personal life, or indeed being able to perhaps identify it in others and help others overcome the condition as well. I'd just like to say that this is a very, very quick overview. This is a highly complex, incredibly interesting and horrifying experience at the same time. It is a huge topic of inquiry. I've been looking at it for the last 10 years. Kate's done an entire PhD on the topic. And so if you would like to join us perhaps later in the year, we'll be having events such as this and putting out information that perhaps elevates our capacity to understand the experience. But over to you, Kate.
Okay, well, before we come to the what can we do about it, Terri, there's a couple more things I'd like to sort of ask those to pop something into the chat, because Terri's explained a bit about the debilitating experience. Now, if you are up for it, please feel free to share whether or not you've experienced this in the chat. Please feel free to share any of your perhaps situations, because as Terri mentioned there about the context that we find ourselves in, sometimes it's the external environment, and sometimes it's the internal socialization that we've taken on board and chosen to adopt a narrative of ourselves inside our own heads. But if you'd like to share any of your experiences in the chat, then please feel free to do so. I've also put into the chat the link tree for Not a Syndrome, which is what we have set up as a website. We've set up ourselves on socials to do Not a Syndrome, and feel free to comment or add to any of our posts on those, or indeed create your own post. But Terri, before I go into any detail on what we can do about it, there's one piece that you mentioned that we'd like to have explained and dealt with a little bit more. And this is this term of self-handicapping, which when I started my PhD thesis, that's now 2017 when you and I first met to begin this long journey that I completed just a couple of years ago. It was a term that I hadn't come across before. Now, I've since learnt what it meant, but I wondered if you could explain that to others, please.
Sure. Yes. Thanks for the question in the chat. There are no silly questions. So if you do have questions about terminology that we're using or concepts that we're discussing, please make sure that you ask those questions. There is no silly question. Self-handicapping is the activity that people will engage in to minimize their own successes. So often the experience with imposter phenomenon is not so much, it is obviously around the fear of failure, but also a fear of success. So one person suggested to me that they didn't put themselves forward for promotions or different projects or activities that would advance their career because they were absolutely terrified of actually getting that promotion and then not being able to do that again, not being able to keep up that success. So they would, as I said, not put themselves forward for these promotions. They would deny their supervisors the opportunity to put their names forward for promotions. Indeed, we know that men will often engage in what's called behavioral self-handicapping. So rather than perhaps not putting themselves forward or not turning up to a job interview, they will feign illness to give themselves an excuse to not go to their say their job interview, and then they'll say, "Oh well, look, I was ill," but that illness may have been fabricated in order to just get themselves out of that. So that's an example of self-handicapping, where you do something to stop your own capacity for achievement. I hope that answers your question, but do let me know in the chat if I do want to. It's almost akin to self-sabotage. It is pretty much very much the same thing.
But it's also sometimes the unconscious bit, that self-sabotage, self-handicapping, that the unconscious part, because I can remember my brother-in-law has anxiety over certain things. And one thing that he was determined to overcome, and he said, yes, right, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And he booked to do this particular thing. And he ended up getting a huge abscess on his tooth. Now, it was a real abscess, but probably triggered by the anxiety subconsciously, and then he couldn't overcome the thing that he was intending to do. So it's an interesting point about the self-handicapping and feigning illness. Sometimes the illness is subconsciously created. It's a true illness, but it's not. It's down to the internal perspective that we have of ourselves. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. And for me, I was never handicapped. I say never handicapped. I was handicapped by my imposter feelings for not speaking up, those sorts of handicappings. But for me, the illness that I got, if in inverted commas, was critical. What's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't matter. It's not critical stomach aches, but anyway, intense stomach aches. That will do. Chronic. That's well anyway. But they were severe stomach aches. So I used to be crippling. That was the word I was looking for. Crippling stomach aches. I used to be, bunched up before an event, worried about speaking about it. Adrenaline would kick in, and then I would be able to perform really well. And things would go well. People would say, "Oh, fantastic job. Well done, Kate. Brilliant. All good." And then my stomach aches would return because I'd be worried that whether I could do it next time. So sometimes it's a cycle that we go through. We get success. We're worried about it, but the success is like a woohoo, and then it's followed by another and for me it was always in my tummy as to whether or not I'd be able to succeed and carry on doing that. Now we've got a few comments coming into the chat, which is fantastic, and thank you all so much for putting these in. Don't feel you have to, but it is lovely if you wish to share. So there's been diminishing of talent and strengths. Hang on, let me just come back to that, Sassy. So the diminishing of talent, strengths, compliments, and putting it down to hard work. All absolutely. I've got one of those on a slide in just a moment for you. But it's also really interesting when we stop doing that, Sassy, and we start to acknowledge what we can do, what we are good at. That's a really important point. So I do want to get to some of those things. So yeah, we will touch on that in a moment. Now, Anna, lots of us have self-doubt. And I think, as Terri said, imposter feelings are not the same as self-doubt, but they appear to be similar in our minds. The anxiety and the worry sort of looks akin to self-doubt. I have this phrase of normal, healthy self-doubt. When you're doing something for the first, second, or third time and you're wondering whether or not it's going to go okay and you're worrying about the outcome, that is normal and healthy self-doubt. If you've got that track record of success, that's the imposter style self-doubt. And that's the one that we're looking to diminish, because not having self-doubt when you're thinking you're going to do something for the first, second, or third time, then actually, I think it's quite handy to have a little bit there rather than the arrogance and hubris of, hey, everything I do will turn out well. Because we know that's not always the case. Yeah, bless you. You've also gone on to say about gaslighting. It can absolutely be part of what colleagues or the environment might trigger things in ourselves. Terri, I don't know if you want to add something on that point about gaslighting that Anna's mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. When we start thinking about that social environment that I talked about as part of the opening comments, certainly if gaslighting, bullying, a dismissal of your own achievements is being, brought about by a culture that perpetuates that, that is certainly going to be something that will exacerbate an individual's sense of I'm not qualified to do this. I'm not able to do. I got here by some mysterious process of luck, or someone's made a mistake. So when we start to think about that social piece, if you are a person who may well experience imposter phenomenon, and then on top of that, you've got this social environment which is feeding and essentially what it might be doing in someone's mind, and certainly I've experienced this, is that it's confirming your own ideas that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing, or that you've got to where you are by some mistake. So that's one of the key issues when we start thinking about the contextual matter of IP. And indeed, that is one of the things that makes it not a syndrome, because a syndrome remains constant. IP, the experience of imposter phenomenon, doesn't. So this idea of understanding whether somebody is actually gaslighting you, and of course, gaslighting is all about another person deliberately making you feel that you can't trust your own judgment. And if that is something that is supported or not called out in the workplace, then it becomes something about it's a problem for the workplace, and of course for you as an individual, but it is not something that exists up inside your own mind. It is not only your problem to solve or to work through, it's also an issue for the workplace and or for the culture or for systems and processes that allow that to continue on. And that's certainly my area of interest.
Yeah. And you talk about the
I'm
culture.
sorry you're experiencing that. It's grim. Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about the culture of the workplace, and Rachel has said one of the things in the workplace, which was where my research looked at, was this point about doing lateral moves. The organization loses out of talent. So yes, thank you for sharing that, because when we move sideways because we don't feel that we're good enough to take that promotion or turn a promotion down to somebody, that's really, really important for an organization to recognize that this is a thing that is really important for them, the organization, to start to support the staff with. And knowledge can be the starting process, but it does also take some action. So when we've got somebody has commented, and I'm so sorry to have read about that bit, Heather, about being publicly shamed in the past, now whether that was with colleagues, but I've also experienced that from childhood. And it's one of these things then that sometimes stays with you. So whether it's in adulthood or childhood, if you've had that public shaming for some reason, it's one of these excruciating moments that you then don't like to put yourself up there. Or if you do put yourself up there, you're constantly on edge about being publicly shamed again. So yeah, and I do talk a little bit about that in my book. One of my early ones was the headmaster at primary school. We were doing a top 10 thing and questions, public general knowledge questions. And what are the 7 dwarfs? We couldn't remember one of them. So he asked me to stand up, and I went bright red because everybody turned to look at me, and everybody then got it. It's bashful. That's the 7th dwarf that we'd forgotten. And I was the one that got pulled out to be public. How cruel is that? And it's interesting that sort of cruelty from teachers, not deliberately being so, but sometimes it happens in the workplace too, that people aren't deliberately doing it. I know, Terri, you talked about gaslighting can absolutely be deliberate, but sometimes it's comments and things that are subtle that go under the radar for most people. But if your imposter is on high alert, we pick up on these things and we can twist them, even if they're not meant to be taken in the way that we take them. Terri, you also wanted to come in, and we've got some more messages to pick up on as well. So yeah, you want?
Yes, I've just picked up on one in regard to this point. I mean, the point of difference, and often, as I mentioned earlier, that we go straight to gender as a point of difference as being an underpinning factor for the experience of imposter phenomenon. But it is any point of difference, and we've got a comment in the chat here that talks about class. Class is often an recognized factor, and it's certainly where my imposter phenomenon comes from. So I came from a dirt poor East End London background, and so it was never expected that I would ever, get past secondary school. It certainly was never going to be, university was never a thing that I was ever going to be, in line for. And then when I actually found myself at university much later in life than most people, and doing a PhD, it was, somebody's made this horrific mistake. And coincidentally, my area of interest was looking at occupational decision making. Is somebody okay
yeah,
there?
I'll just mute all participants. Somebody's managed to come on to. That's all right, we're done.
Okay. So the my area of interest got me into literature that was examining who actually goes to university, and it was people like me. It's so in the minority that there is, it was negligible in terms of being recognised as a discrete group of, or discrete cohort of people that actually end up doing PhDs. And so I had this, not only should I not have been there, but the literature was saying you shouldn't be here either. And so my point is that there are a whole raft of differences that people find themselves experiencing in the social environment, and that is one platform experience that feeds imposter feelings. So any point of otherness, class, gender, neurodiversity, cultural background, all sorts of things. In academia, if you're coming from a low socioeconomic class, or if you don't have the publications that everybody else has, that could be an issue as well.
Yeah, and I might have
so thank you for popping that into the chat.
I might have the PhD, but I don't have the first degree, and that's still in my mind. I somehow jumped to a master's in my 40s without the first degree. So yeah, it's so interesting about how we view ourselves and look, and whether or not the environment says that you should be there too, and whether or not the social sort of societal expectations also have groomed you in some ways, sometimes again subconsciously groomed you to be in the place that you find yourself now, or maybe you've gone beyond those expectations. And one of the things that I find people tell me, it's that when they've gone beyond their childhood expectations, when they've done more than was ever expected of them, when they've achieved more, grown and actually become more successful at work. So that's one of the things that we need to just recognize and accept, that sometimes kindness to self, compassion to self is also really important. So what I'd like to do is I will just go through a few of the strategies. This, as Terri said, with the explanation of the phenomenon, it's a headline, it's an overview. We're not going in depth today. We can, of course, go in depth at another point in time, but I'd like to share with you some of what you can do about it. So at least you might start the process for yourselves. So I will share some of those, and then we'll pick up with some more questions that are coming through in the chat. And if there's any that we've missed that you've put in that you haven't had answered by the time I finish, please feel free to either repaste it or unmute and say it, because we will be covering those questions, and we do want to give some time to your comments and your questions as well before we close at 9 o'clock. So if I bring up my slides like this, then we're thinking about what can we do about it? How can we cope with our inner imposter feelings? Well, one of the things that you can start to do is what you've already done, and Terri mentioned at the very beginning, people don't often do. We don't often talk about it, except for the likes of Terri and me that keep banging on about them. But it is really important. It's really important to have that opportunity to talk about your imposter feelings, because you feel, when you experience them, you feel alone. And so reading through the comments that have been shared in the chat about your own experiences, people who've been 30 years of work, lots of experience, but still not going for that extra role. It's that point about, if you hear other people's stories, you realize that it's not just you. And that was one of the threads that kept running through with my participants in my PhD research. I interviewed 21 people, of which 5 were men and the rest were women. And they were saying, oh, phew, it's not just me then. One of the other things they started to say was, this may sound weird. And they give me a comment or a phrase that so many others had said. And lots of them said, this may sound weird, da 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 da. It's like, nope, not weird at all. It's normal experience, but we haven't normalized it. And yet somehow I also don't want to normalize it. I'd like to diminish it, not say, yay, it's okay. We all get imposter feelings. That's fine. Just accept them. No, we can do something about it. The first thing is to start to talk about it. And then thinking about this self-talk. Because somebody also popped into the chat about hard work earlier. Well, sometimes our successes we put down to luck. Oh, I just got lucky, you know, just happened to be let into university. Just somehow they've marked my degree wrong and I shouldn't have got a distinction, but I did. So maybe that was luck too. Or it's because we've worked really hard. I've put in extra effort. I've made that effort and therefore I have been successful. Now, luck and hard work have a role to play in success, but there's three other things that have a bigger role. So I'm going to suggest that success is partly luck, hard work, and then three big dollops of knowledge, skills, and abilities. And it's that bit that we tend to forget, the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities that you have built up over time. And yet we tend to, as has already been mentioned into the chat, we tend to dismiss it when other people acknowledge our knowledge, skills, and abilities. So one of the strategies that you can go away from today, if you don't already do it, is this particular strategy. And this is about internalizing how good you really are, because what other people see on the outside could well be a truer and more accurate version of you than you see of yourself on the inside. So the external feedback that you have and the positive external feedback that you get, how many of you keep this feedback? I'm just going to launch a quick poll and you can answer yes or no. Do you keep your positive feedback somewhere? So I'll give you a chance just to pop in your answers. We're getting some quick answers coming through and we're almost neck and neck on the yeses and the nos. This is really interesting. So if you keep your positive feedback somewhere, that is fantastic. It is a start, but it is not the end of the story. So I'm just going to share those results with you so you folks can see it. We have 57% saying, yes, woohoo, I keep my positive feedback somewhere, and 43% that are going, nope, I don't share it. I don't keep it even. So what I would suggest you do, for those of you who are in that no category, is set up a folder. Start your wonderful me folder, your brag file. We've got a smile file just popped into the chat, which is fantastic. Thank you, Susie. Start your smile files. Victoria, I'm coming to that point. I don't believe it, though. This is the whole point. You keep it, but you don't believe it. So this poll that I've just popped up is for those who answered yes. The question is, have you looked at it recently? So you might keep it, but do you review it? And we've got the massive, overwhelming majority coming through answering this particular question to say, nope, nope, I don't. I get it, I keep it, but no, I don't review it. I don't look at it. And it's interesting. We've had somebody else pop into the chat and thank you for that. It's this point about if you keep it, but it feels like you're reading about a different person. It is actually you, Becky, but you haven't internalized that person. You haven't actually said, oh, okay, that is who I am. That knowledge, that skills, and those abilities are what I can do now. We've got some strategies for this. So first step, keep the positive feedback. Second step is to start to review it regularly, because some of you who answered yes, I'm guessing may have reviewed it for perhaps it was a promotion or a presentation that you had to give or a little bit of a confidence wobble on something and you wanted to give yourself a bit of a boost. I'm going to suggest if we truly want to change our internal narrative, and this is the internal bit that we can do, we have control over, is we review that positive feedback and then yes and it. So you review it regularly, not just on the one-off occasions, but every week or every fortnight or at least once a month. This will feel really awkward. This will feel like, it's difficult. Terri's had toe curling mentioned to her. I've had one person say she wants to go under the table if she gets positive feedback. Absolutely. It's about starting to believe it. So when you review your positive feedback, the third step in this process, I take from the School of Improvisation. It's a yes and, not an but. So we tend to go, yeah, but they would say that we think it's they're just being kind, they're just being nice, or if it's your manager, it's, well, what do they want? And we get suspicious of the positive feedback. Well, I'm going to suggest you start to yes and it, not out loud, but inside your head. So you're not going, yes, and aren't I wonderful? Thank you so much. What I'm suggesting you do is you go, yes, and I learnt X from that situation, or yes, and I can see my skill in that situation came to play, or yes, and this feedback is a common thread, so it's one of my strengths. So yes, and it in some way that acknowledges the feedback that you have been given to help to change that internal narrative. So that's the point. Terry's just put into the chat, and you're absolutely right, Terry. Thank you for adding this so people can read it, about the way in which we feel and internalize it in our bodies. The point about being uncomfortable, it is a very useful habit to get into, feeling comfortable with that uncomfortable feeling. And one of the things that I think it also takes is courage. Because sometimes what we need to do is it takes courage to accept the positive feedback. It takes courage to own it. And one of the parts of my research was around psychological courage. And what if you updated the view of yourself to one that is more positive and more accurate? And my participants couldn't think of a time when they had done so. But it's certainly something that I believe, and we're yet to get full academic research grounded in evidence to say it will work, but I do believe that if we do this updating, it can help. So we need to take time to reflect. We need to take some time out. And this morning, you guys have taken some time out to be with us, and we're hugely grateful to explore this narrative. But taking time out to reflect, take time out to look at that positive feedback. And then there's a big stop. Because what you can do with the positive feedback is going, oh, yeah, but it's not as good as so-and-so's. Oh, yeah, but, it didn't match up to their standards. Take time out and compare yourself to yourself. So stop comparing yourself to others and start to look at, what have you learned this week from last week? What skills have you developed from this time last month to now, or this time last year to now? You will have learned a huge amount, but we don't often stop because our imposter feelings say we've got to carry on, we've got to keep doing, we've got to know more and learn more and learn more. So we keep going and keep going and keep going, and we don't do the stopping, pausing, reflecting and updating of ourselves. So that is one of the things that you can also do. A couple of other points to mention before I get to bring it to the close and your questions. We need to let go of this idea of perfection. Nobody is perfect. One of the things that I think we need to let go of is recognizing that actually optimal is what we need to aim for, not perfection. So done is better than not done. Good enough is good enough. All of those mantras are great, and you can start to tell yourself those, but also it's trying to believe it in here. So work to that 80% rule. Send out a draft, test the waters, let people know this is my current thinking. It's not quite finalized yet, but what do you think? And then you will realize how much really needs to be changed, rather than perfecting it, sending it out and then going ouch internally when somebody does spot that spelling mistake that you had missed. And then we could do with reframing failures. We could do with changing the word failure to learnings. So what did I learn from that situation? Because sometimes imposter style thinking can mean when something goes wrong, we internalize it and go, I am a failure. Whereas in actual fact, it didn't work. What did you learn from it? And then for many of you who've joined us today, you may well be looking at how to support others. So a very quick heads up on this. Stop telling them how amazing they are and start to help them understand where their thinking comes from. So if you are wanting to support or coach somebody who has imposter feelings, then these tips might be useful. So ask them some questions rather than give them, what, you? I'd never have thought of you as an imposter. You're doing an amazing job. That does not help. But ask, where do these feelings come from? What impact are they having? What evidence do you have that supports those feelings? And I personally think that is a really important question to ask first before you ask for evidence that contradicts them. Because when we look at being contradicted inside our heads, we go, no, you haven't heard me properly. So actually ask, what evidence do you have that supports those feelings? Then what evidence do you have that contradicts them? and also what makes those feelings worse or better. And one of the things that my research indicated is having the external support, having some cheerleaders, having somebody by your side, whether that is your manager, managerial support, organizational support can make a huge difference, but also can somebody by your side that is going to support you, but not just tell you how amazing they are, but be there when you want to crumble, when you want to cry, and actually help you look at that objective evidence objectively. So I'm going to end there. We will share with you the opportunities of our contact details, and I'll come on to this because I'm hiding now, Terri. So we'll share you our contact details. If you've got smartphones, then feel free to grab them out and you can catch our LinkedIns in just a moment. But Terri, I'm going to bring you back into the spotlight and we'll pick up on some of the questions before we show those last few slides. So add you to the slide.
If I can just pick up on a comment here, I think it's from Felicity, says that there's a great point about frequent reflection, and that standard work culture tells us that annual reflection, say at appraisal or performance management time, whatever it might be called in your workplace, is enough. And from people reporting their experiences as part of this workplace process, that it is absolutely one of the times of the year or might be half year or whatever it might be, is absolutely the time where they get most stressed, because this is a time where it is expected that you will lay on the table all of your successes and your value to the organization. This is what I've done. Aren't I fabulous? This worked well, whatever. And so this is often it is pinned to pay negotiations. And so if people who are experiencing IP cannot see their track record, they do not believe the good feedback that they've got, that perhaps they are unable to see their own value to the organization, their own strengths, their own capacities, then it is doubly difficult, probably almost impossible for them to articulate that in a performance management review or an appraisal. And so when we start looking at this as a social and a workplace issue, we see that people who are unable to articulate those things will routinely be not in line for promotions, not offered opportunities elsewhere, and in some cases, and it was evidence from my research, walk away with lower bonuses or not receive the same sorts of remuneration uplift that their colleagues might. So when we start, now you're sort of perhaps getting a bit of a gist of why I actually think that the imposter phenomenon needs to be put into a space where it can be properly understood, because it is not just something for the individual to worry about. When we start thinking about diversity and inclusion, I've got an interest in women being elevated into more senior roles. If this is an issue in a workplace, then it can prevent people who are absolutely qualified, absolutely able and competent and with a suite of capabilities advancing. Because in one small, or what you could perhaps suggest as one small system or process in an organization, can have a huge impact on not only the individual, but also on productivity, EDIB, so equity, diversity, inclusion and belonging, and a whole raft of other things such as gender pay gaps as well. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. One of the other things I want to pick up on there, Terri, about the organizations, and goes all the way back to this term of self-handicapping, because one of the other things from a self-handicapping point of view is we procrastinate, we miss deadlines, and therefore, we stop producing the work. I've spoken to many people in organizations who now believe that they have lost talent because of that self-handicapping, and they were actually performance managing people out, even though they knew they could do the job. They'd got the knowledge, the skills and the capabilities. They just were not performing. And they're now wondering, obviously they can't go back to those particular individuals, but they're now wondering whether it was the imposter feelings that were causing, or at least somewhere in the mix of enabling that you're not performing at work to happen. Because if you perform really well at work, you're up for promotion. Maybe you're not good enough. And the internal thing is, actually, I'll keep myself low. I'll go under the radar and I will underperform. And I've spoken to many people now that are wondering whether they've lost people because of their imposter feelings, because they've left the organizations. And other people will demote themselves. They will actually go for underpaid jobs, lower paid jobs, less stressful jobs, either within the same organization or outside of jobs, because outside of other organizations, just to release themselves of their imposter stress.
Can I just jump in on that? That often those jobs are not necessarily intrinsically stressful, so the job itself isn't stressful. It's the additional stress that individuals experience because of that overwork, that sense of perfectionism, the stress around, are other people actually going to find me out, even though they've got that track record of success that stretches out behind them. And that's, you know, part of the tragedy of the whole experience.
Yeah. And that's one of the other reasons Terri and I are so, I could use this word passionate, even though I don't like the word passionate, but we are really passionate about changing the narrative and enabling people to overcome and also help other people with overcome their imposter feelings, is this point about the stress and the stress that can then trigger burnout. And we've got enough stress in the world, we've got enough stress in our lives without the internal imposter thinking and the external environment triggering imposter thoughts. We could do with that stress at least being diminished. So for me, that's one of the things. We don't need the extra stress of imposter thinking. So Terri, did you want to share your slides now for the end? If there are other questions that come through whilst we're slide sharing, just so you can pick up our contact details, then please do feel free to get in touch with Terri or myself on LinkedIn. We'd be more than happy to connect with you. And you guys have all registered through Eventbrite. So what we will do, if you want to, you can be kept in touch with us by email as well, because Not a Syndrome has got that ability to give you that chance to connect with us through I guess we could create an email list and let you know when we have further what's the word? Further events coming up.
Events.
That's the word.
I've not got that slide. Have you got that slide on yours, Kate?
Which one? Yes.
The one
I've got it. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yep. Let me share. Okay. Thank you. Right. So contact us slide coming up. Share. There we go.
Yeah, so our plan is to keep the momentum going over the year, and of course next year we'll roll around, and February 27th will remain the date for the International Imposter Phenomenon Awareness Day. Please make sure that you join us for those events, because, like I said, this is a huge topic. It has a whole raft of discussion that we haven't been able to get into, that we will over the next 12 months or so. But please contact us. The details are there in terms of questions that you might have, or indeed experiences that you might want to share with us as well.
Yeah. And if there's other questions in the chat that you want to ask at this point, then please do. But we've just had somebody pop in that I'd be concerned if I voiced my imposter phenomenon feelings, that others may then think I am an imposter. This was something that came out through my research too. People were going, but what if I really am an imposter? What's so interesting is you won't be. You won't be a real imposter. The real imposters don't have the awareness that they may potentially be an imposter. They're just deliberately defrauding people. They're doing it consciously. But you are thinking that you might be. You won't be outed as one. It's this internal sense of fraudulence. It's not actually being an imposter, but you feel like you might be. So it's this sometimes this comment of, oh, I wonder if I can do it. I wonder if I share something, they'll realize that actually, and go, yeah, I knew you couldn't do it all along. But you can. So it's that sense of finding the safe place to talk about it. So you do not have to talk about it at work. That's one of the things. It doesn't have to be with a colleague. It could be with somebody else that you decide to share it with first and foremost. That's entirely up to you. But yeah, be aware of that. Thank you. Thank you for putting that comment in. Terri, you've got something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you do have those sorts of concerns, there are coaches about the place. I ran a number of workshops in the UK for coaches on dealing effectively with imposter phenomenon, because a lot of coaches will deal with this as usual self-doubt. So find yourself a coach who has a good grip on what the imposter phenomenon is, rather than just sort of going through the normal motions of trying to big you up because you're perhaps lacking a little bit of confidence. So there are coaches out there who understand this very clearly.
Yeah, because it's not the same as a lack of confidence. It's not the same as the lack of confidence kicks in when you don't already have that track record. You're building up your experience, your knowledge, and your skills. That's how confidence grows. But a lack of confidence is not the same. There's some research that indicates it can go and correlate with. So a lack of confidence, high imposter feelings, but it's not the same thing. So that's one of the other key things. I've swapped the slides over now. So if you want to connect with us on Not a Syndrome through the socials, then please feel free to do that. That's a different QR code there that you will find, notasyndrome.org. And also I've put into the chat my MailChimp sign up if you want to do that too. And if you're going for find a coach, then please look for a coach that also has that point about imposter phenomenon in their language, not syndrome. So developing others, we've just had a quick question. I'll do another quick plug, if I may, a quick plug for the book, because it is, honestly, Claire, I mean, I'm not saying it because I've written it, but it is a useful resource to delve deeper. There's a section here on supporting others, as well as how you might deal with your own feelings. But if I did some sessions for the EMCC, I can't remember what that actually stands for now, but there's various different coaching organizations that I have done some sessions for. And I'm sure Terri's also spoken to coaching organizations too. So keep your eyes out, Claire, and by all means stick on our mailing list and we'll let you know when something's coming up that's appropriate, that's coaching specific. That would be great. Any other questions that anybody would like to ask before we sign off, and thank you all?
Feel free to open your mics too if you would like to have a chat to us. That would be great.
Yeah. So I'm going to say, Sassy, I'm looking forward to seeing you too. Really looking forward to that. The HR Confidence Club is going to go into things in a little bit more depth. We'd still have an hour, not a huge amount, but honestly, don't worry about unmuting. If it accidentally happens, it happens a lot during the nursery drop-off. Bless you. Well, thank you for joining us. That's the important part. So enjoy the rest of your day, a Friday, as it were. It's a Friday. So happy Friday, everybody. Have a super weekend. Some of you are on Friday evening time already.
Yes.
And we thank you very much for joining there. Some of you maybe haven't eaten breakfast yet, or have maybe been eating whilst we've been talking, but enjoy the rest of your Friday and the weekend and keep in contact with us. Thank you so much. If you want to unmute and say goodbye as you go, then please feel free to do that too. It would be lovely too. And you can turn on your cameras and wave to us as you go. That would also be fantastic. All right. Take care, everyone. Cheers.